Hello everyone, today I will be presenting Mark's 2022 article, Feeling at Home in Two Cultural Worlds, Bicultural Identity Integration Moderate Felt Authenticity. The paper asks an interesting question: when bicultural individuals adapt to different cultural expectations, do they still feel authentic? This topic matters because bicultural experiences are increasingly common. Many people move between different cultural settings through family background, migration, language, education, work, or community life. That often means adjusting to different cultural norms depending on the situation. From the outside, this can look like successful adaptation, but internally, it may not always feel comfortable or authentic. So the paper raises a larger question: how do people maintain a coherent sense of self while moving across different cultural worlds? Our starting point comes from Horn's dynamic constructivist theory, which suggests that culture is not simply a fixed set of traits inside a person. Instead, different cultural frameworks can become active depending on contextual cues such as language, symbols, or situations. This helps explain cultural framed switching, where bicultural individuals may think, feel, or behave differently depending on which cultural frame is activated. So, responding differently across contexts does not necessarily mean someone is being inauthentic or inconsistent. However, not all bicultural individuals experience this process in the same way. This is where the concept of bicultural identity integration, or BII, becomes important. BII refers to the extent to which a bicultural person experiences their two cultural identities as compatible or conflicting. People with high BII tend to experience their cultural identities as integrated, while people with low BII are more likely to experience them as separate or in tension. So, moving across cultural context can feel psychologically very different depending on how integrated a person's identities are. Earlier research had already shown that BII matters in several ways. Chen and al. Found that bicultural individuals do not all respond to cultural cues in the same way, and BII explains whether people assimilate to or contrast with those cues. Mark and Morris also show that Asian American biculturals respond differently across cultural contexts depending on BII. So, before this paper, the field already knew that BII shapes how bicultural individuals respond to cultural situations. There is also evidence that BII matters psychologically. Wynn and Bennett Martinez found that stronger identity integration is associated with better adjustment, and Yamborski suggested it may support narrative coherence and well-being. But one question remained: when bicultural individuals adapt to cultural expectations, how does that adaptation actually feel? This is the gap Mark's paper addresses. Earlier research showed that bicultural individuals adapt across contexts and that BII shapes their responses to cultural cues, but it remained unclear how that adaptation feels psychologically. Mark therefore examines whether conformity feels authentic or inauthentic. Authenticity refers to feeling true to oneself. Schmader suggests that authenticity can emerge from a sense of fit between identity and environment. For bicultural individuals who move across cultural contexts, the key issue is not whether they behave the same in every setting, but whether their behavior across contexts still feel connected to a coherent sense of self. Here, it challenges the idea that authenticity requires consistency across contexts. Mark's objective is to examine whether BII moderates felt authenticity during cultural conformity in bicultural individuals. The prediction is that in individuals low in BII will feel more inauthentic when conforming to cultural norms, while individuals high in BII will remain authentic. To test this, Mark experimentally examines whether the same act of cultural conformity can feel authentic for some bicultural individuals but inauthentic for others. Mark conducted 4 experiments with the Asian American bicultural participants. Participants first completed a BII measure, and the study then used cultural primes to activate either Asian or American cultural frames. Participants responded to conformity or non-conformity scenarios with the felt authenticity as the main outcome. Later studies also examined cultural identity threat and included a self-kindness intervention. This scenario-based experiment allows the researchers to examine this psychological process under controlled conditions. The findings show a clear pattern. Participants with low BII felt less authentic when conforming to cultural expectations, while those with high BII generally remained authentic. For low BII individuals, inauthenticity was linked to cultural identity threat. Conformity felt inauthentic because it seems to suppress or undermine another part of the self. Self-kindness also reduced these effects, helping them feel more authentic. Overall, whether conformity felt authentic depended on how individuals experienced the relationship between their cultural identities. This paper contributes in 3 ways. It moves beyond outward adaptation to the inner experience of authenticity, shows more precisely why BII matters psychologically, and shows that the same adaptive behavior can feel authentic for one bicultural person but inauthentic for another. In this way, the paper deepens earlier work by showing that BII shapes not only responses to cultural cues, but also how those responses are experienced. The broader significance of the paper is that it challenges a common assumption about authenticity. Authenticity is often treated as behaving the same in every context. But Mark's findings suggest that this may be too simple, especially for bicultural individuals. Instead, authenticity may depend on cultural context rather than strict consistency. The paper also suggests that BII may function as a psychological resources under stress. For instance, work by Champlu during the COVID-19 emergency shows that identity integration may matter during periods of uncertainty and disruption. The self-kindness finding suggests a possible mechanism. Neff and Wong argue that self-compassion offers a healthier way of relating to oneself than relying only on global self-esteem. So, responding more kindly to oneself may reduce the emotional cost of identity conflict. This may explain why Mark's intervention worked. Self-compassion can reduce identity threat and help low BII individuals feel more authentic. The study also has limitations. It focuses only on Asian American biculturals, so the findings may not generalize equally well to other bicultural populations. It relied heavily on self-report and used scenario-based experiments that may not fully capture real-life identity experiences. The conformity priming paradigm also complicates interpretation because participants were sometimes exposed to one culture and sometimes two simultaneously. Even so, the paper makes an important contribution. Bicultural adaptation does not automatically threaten authenticity. What matters is whether individuals experience their identities as compatible or conflicting. And most importantly, bicultural adaptation is not just about changing behavior across contexts, but about whether those changes still feel true to oneself. Ultimately, the paper asks a deeper question. When bicultural individuals adapt, do they still feel at home in themselves? Thank you.